And now I'm happy to introduce Glenn Wharton. Welcome. Glenn is a professor of art history at UCLA and chair of the UCLA Getty Program in the Conservation of Cultural Heritage. Prior to this appointment, he taught at the Museum Studies program at New York University and developed MoMA's program in video performance and software-based art. Glenn will give us an insight into how the UCLA Getty program in the conservation of cultural heritage has embraced sustainability, collaboration, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Glenn, I'm happy to hand the mic over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Martina, for that nice introduction. And thank you for inviting me to speak at this conference. I have to say I missed the earlier presentations because it's not even 7 in the morning for me here in Los Angeles. But I do look forward to listening to the recordings. I think this is just very exciting to be able to gather all of these people together to speak about our programs and education, development and education. I decided not to develop a PowerPoint simply because the content of what I'll be speaking about doesn't lend itself to images so easily. I'll be talking about changes and new initiatives that we are undertaking at the UCLA Getty Conservation Program and why we're expanding our focus in these areas. Before I begin, I would like to say that as a land grant institution, UCLA and the UCLA Getty Conservation Program acknowledge the Gabrielina Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tovangar, the Los Angeles Basin and the South Channel Islands. Los Angeles has one of the largest populations of Native American and indigenous people of any city in the United States. And UCLA has multiple programs that now engage with members of the Gabrielino Tongva tribes and other local Native populations to share knowledge and to redress what occurred in the horrendous events of the past and the systemic suppression that still exists today. Now, why did I say this? To be honest, it's actually rather awkward for me to begin a presentation this way. But I say it because it reminds me, and hopefully others, that history is revisionist. We always frame the past and use the past to construct our individual and collective identities. Being reminded of the traditional caretakers of this land who are still here reminds me that my own identity as a conservator was shaped by tradition and priorities that are not universal. In fact, they're being widely challenged as we ask ourselves today, why are we conserving the past? Who benefits from the decisions we make? And who's excluded from deciding how the past is represented? So some of you know me as a contemporary art conservator, or possibly even a time-based media conservator, and I was deeply immersed in that field, and still am immersed in that field for many years. But like many of us, I originally trained in other areas of conservation. I trained as an archaeological conservator and an object sculpture conservator. And I actually worked in that realm for many years before my deep dive into contemporary art, and particularly my work at MoMA with Jim Coddington and others, where I had the opportunity to help build the program for time-based media conservation. So I took this job as professor of art history and chair of the UCLA Getty Conservation Program, in part because I just personally wanted to step out or widen my my vision to the larger concerns of cultural heritage conservation and see what I had learned from working with artists and working with time-based media and conceptual art, and how that might resonate with current efforts in conservation of cultural heritage. And in fact, there's a lot. It's very, very interesting. I just taught a seminar 2 quarters ago, looking at current theory and practice in contemporary art, and current theory and practice in the larger landscape of our field, and seeing where there's resonance and where there's not resonance as well. But that's the subject for another lecture. And I would love to give that someday. In fact, hopefully I will. But I will, well, first, let me give you some just background as to why we're making these changes in the program at UCLA. We're living in a historical moment in which a lot of changes are happening very fast: climate change, and also social change with Black Lives Matter, with the Me Too movement, and many other pressing environmental and social issues that are forcing us to rethink our priorities. In fact, I landed in this program at a moment in which not only the world seemed to be changing, but our students, the younger generation, were demanding that we refocus our activities. And I'm pleased to say that we're not alone. Our international organizations, the IIC, the ICOMCC, ICROM, and more locally, our national organizations, the American Institute for Conservation, are all developing initiatives to address climate change and sustainability in all of its forms: environmental, economic, social, cultural sustainability. And equally important, our funding agencies are reordering their priorities. And so if nothing else, we should be taking note of the fact that new grant initiatives are demanding that we center sustainability issues in our new projects that we're asking funding for. This should certainly wake us up. When I came to the UCLA Getty program in 2019 with this vision to make change happen, fortunately I wasn't alone. Our students, faculty, and staff all supported these efforts to rethink who we were and what we wanted to do within the world of conservation education. So just to back up a little bit, the UCLA Getty Conservation Program was started in 2004, so it's a very young program. The reason why the Getty name is on the program is that the Getty Conservation Institute was instrumental in creating the program. They had identified archaeological and ethnographic conservation as needing training in the United States, and developed an initiative to help fund a graduate program in this area, and looked around at different universities and finally landed on UCLA. So they worked together with UCLA to create the program. They also built state-of-the-art training labs at the Getty Villa in Malibu. But after 5 years, as planned, they withdrew their funding, and we are now a UCLA graduate program. So we're affiliated with the Getty in many ways, but it is a UCLA program. And one of the very first things that I initiated and everyone agreed with was to change the name of our program. It had been called the UCLA Getty Program in the Conservation of Archaeological and Ethnographic Materials. Everyone found the word ethnographic problematic because it's hierarchical and othering of non-Western art and culture. So we had a lot of discussions and finally a vote, and our alumni weighed in, and we decided to rename the program the UCLA Program in the Conservation of Cultural Heritage. So not only is it less problematic, but I think it addresses the larger landscape that we would like to address. Another thing that we did early on was to revise our mission statement and develop 3 core values that would guide our efforts. These values are sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and collaborative practice. And so to act on these new values, we sought funding from a number of different agencies and received a number of grants the last couple of years. The first one I'd like to point out is a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to integrate sustainability into our education. And this is a multi-year grant. Hopefully we'll get phase 2 funding for further implementation. But the idea is to look at the way we're training our students, look at the way we are practicing in our labs, and make our labs greener through recycling and use of greener solvents and other measures to lower our own carbon footprint. But also just to revise our syllabi from top to bottom, look at what readings we're assigning, who the authors are, who we're excluding from our choice of authors, but also what we're teaching, the use of solvents and recycling. So we're integrating all of this into our own teaching. Some of our students, one of our PhD students is working on indigenous methods of pest eradication in India, the use of neem leaves. And so she's doing scientific analysis of these practices to see if they could be integrated into Western practices. That's just one of many examples where students in my class right now on the conservation of archaeological metals are looking at recent literature suggesting less toxic methods of treating Bronze disease, for instance, and we'll be doing, we'll be testing these methods and investigating, you know, how they work in our own classroom. So the idea with all of this is to eventually create modules that we can share internationally with other training programs. Another grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities is to support a model of collaborative practice in which our students will work with other students and other scholars and caretakers of indigenous representatives who will be bringing their own concerns and practices into our deliberations of how to care for indigenous materials. The Getty Foundation just provided us with funding to hire a director of community engagement and inclusive practice. And she will help us develop relationships with African American collections to extend the model that we've developed for tribal collections to, again, engage with African American scholars and students in our own research and model this collaborative practice that we hope our students will continue as they move out into the world. And finally, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation has provided us with funding for our Opportunity for Diversity in Conservation workshops. And these are headed by Professor Ellen Pearlstein to conduct summer workshops for people from underrepresented populations to learn about conservation. And one of the nice things about this grant is that Ellen and her staff are able to continue working with graduates from these summer workshops to help them obtain internships, make sure they're taking their chemistry and other required coursework to apply for programs in conservation. And this has been going on for a few years, and I'm really happy to say that a number of the graduates of these workshops are now applying and getting into conservation programs. So these are just a few of the initiatives that we've been developing at the UCLA Getty Conservation Program. We're working locally, but hopefully with global impact. And some of you might ask, what does this have to do with conservation of contemporary art, and how does this transfer to the conservation of contemporary art? And like I say, that's definitely the subject for another presentation, which I hope to do someday. But I would like to just say that we're all facing climate change, and we're all facing issues of sustainability, environmental, social, cultural, economic. We're living in a world where there are floods, fires, temperature extremes, and they're just demanding that we focus all of our activities to shrink our carbon footprint. And I think those of us in conservation graduate programs have to prioritize this, no matter what area of conservation we're working in. So I'm very pleased to say that what I learned in the conservation of contemporary art about collaborative practice, for instance, transfers very well the work that I did, that we're all doing with artists to understand their intentions, their concerns, and sometimes even prioritizing them over technical and material conservation concerns, parallels the work that we're now doing with Indigenous representatives and representatives from other communities that are connected with the objects that we're treating. So I look forward to continuing this work within our own program, but also working with my colleagues in other conservation programs, including contemporary art, to advance sustainability, collaboration, diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of our training and our research, and hopefully to impact the field. And I have to just say, it's really our students that are demanding this work. It's the younger generation that are not going to let this go. And we either have to jump in and make this happen, or they'll do it without us. So thank you for listening to me. I could go on and on and on, but I wanted to keep this brief. So I look forward to a discussion session later.